I just read the part of the Quran that every Muslim tells Christians to read, and I didn't convert, but probably not for the reason that you think.
Oh no, a Christian apologetic is reading the Quran and didn't convert? Whoop-de-doo, what a unicorn. Surah Al-Baqarah 2171. And the example of those who disbelieve is like that of one who shouts at what hears nothing except calls and cries, deaf, dumb, and blind, so they do not understand. Allah already talks about you guys, bro. The reason why you don't understand those verses, I can guarantee you right here, that you don't understand it. So you're putting your own narratives on the words, or you think you know better than the God of mankind.
Stupid.
And you're trying to twist the verses. Let's go.
Welcome to day 3 of posting about the Quran every day until I get through the whole thing. This is just 3, and I finally read Surah Al-Imran, or at least the beginning of it. This is the surah, the chapter of the Quran that talks the most about Isa, or Jesus. So Muslims have been in my comment section telling me to read this passage to learn about what Muslims will believe is the true story of Isa. Now this whole reading had a lot of very interesting things. It contains the famous ayat from Surah Al-Baqarah from the 2nd chapter, "Let there be no compulsion in religion, for the truth stands out clearly in falsehood," which Muslims will often quote in response to allegations of Islam spreading by the sword, saying no, the Quran itself commands there to be no compulsion. After that, lots of verses about zakat, about giving charity, spending your wealth on the needy. It's where you see the command against interest. And the last 2 ayat are famous of Surah Al-Baqarah, and it reads like a dua, like a prayer, asking Allah for forgiveness, to not have a burden placed on those who are praying, a prayer for victory over the disbelieving people. And that's the end of that surah, the longest surah in the Quran.
Even with all of that, he still couldn't find guidance. Remember.
And then onto Surah Al-Imran. Now, on top of containing verses about the oneness of God, how Allah is worthy of worship, it contains verses about Mary and Jesus, about Maryam and Isa. Now, a lot of Christian apologists at this point will begin to talk about a slew of common issues. For example, they'll talk about how Imran, or Aaron, is denoted in the Quran to be the father of Mary, confusing Mary with Miriam.
Just for the sake of some clarifications for those of you Muslims or Christians that doesn't know, the phrase sister of Aaron doesn't have to mean a literal siblings. In Semitic language, it can refer to as lineage, piety. The Quran never says Mary lived at the same time as Moses. That is not correct, right? And it never even claims, there's not a single verse that you can show me that says Miriam is Moses' sister. That assumption is added by the reader. That is an interpretation, and it does not have any text from the Quran to back up that interpretation. These are some verses from the Bible that would back up what I am telling you guys. This is going to explain to you Christians. Gospel of John 8:39. They answered him, "Abraham is our father." Jesus said, "If you were children of Abraham, you would be doing the works Abraham did." Right? They are not direct children of Abraham. They're from Abraham's lineage. Again, Gospel of Luke 13:16. "And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, be loosed from this bond?" This woman is not direct daughter of Abraham, but she is from that lineage. Gospel of Matthew 1:1, Jesus is called the son of David and the son of Abraham. The book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Jesus is from Abraham and David's lineage. He is not directly their biological son.
Some will say that Maryam and Isa are both untouched by the devil, echoing an existing Catholic theology about the Immaculate Conception of Mary and the sinlessness of Jesus. They'll argue that in Ayah 45, when Isa is called a word, that is a borrowing language from Christian theology, particularly John 1, that Isa has a particular place in the Quran because he alone is called Al-Masih, the Messiah. They'll argue that Ayah 48, which tells the story of Jesus blowing into a clay bird and making it alive, is pulled straight from previous Gnostic texts, meaning it pre-existed in weird cultic religious literature, and that it portrays Jesus as divine because it's giving him the authority to create life.
By the way, the books he just referred to that the story was taken, those books are considered unreliable by their own Christians. Surah Al-Ma'idah 575, the Messiah, son of Mary, was no more than a messenger. So just because he has the title of Messiah, that doesn't mean he is divine. He is just another messenger, he's just another servant. Surah Al-Imran 3:49, "I create for you from clay the form of a bird, then I breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by the permission of Allah." Okay, again, like these things happened. During Jesus' ministry, these things happened. It's normal for certain people to actually remember this story because it happened. But remember, copying someone's work also copies their mistakes. There's a lot of mistakes in those books that Quran does not contain. In those books, Jesus does kill a child because the child bumped into him, is harsh towards the teacher when the teacher corrects him, and many more. So just because one part of the actual thing that happened, the factual thing, that doesn't mean that it's actually copied.
And of course, Muslims will point to Ayah 45 very often, wherein Allah promises to raise Isa to himself, delivering him from those who disbelieve, interpreting this to mean that Jesus was not really crucified. And then there's more about how prophets will only tell people to worship Allah and not themselves, and all sorts of other verses that seem to interact with Christianity. Now, I think that some of those arguments aren't really good arguments for Christianity, and some of them hold a little bit more weight. So why am I not convinced about this image of Jesus? Not just because I'm a kafir who doesn't want to believe in the Quran, but because my knowledge of who God is and what his plan is comes from what God has already revealed.
What do you mean what God has already revealed? You don't have those books, bro. The gospel doesn't exist. Your knowledge of God is based on what John, Mark, Matthew, Paul, etc., all of these 40 different authors have. Your description of God comes from what they think and what the people told them.
In other words, when somebody's being presented as the Messiah, I want to look at the previous scriptures and see how the Messiah is presented.
No.
In other words, when somebody's being presented as the Messiah, I want to look at the previous scriptures and see how the Messiah is presented. When I look at Jesus and who he is as he is presented in historic sources and the Christian scriptures, I see the Messiah that is foretold by prophets centuries before him in the Tanakh.
Book of Numbers 23:19. God is not man. The Tanakh doesn't describe Jesus at all. So if you prefer that, you are actually rejecting the only source that claims Jesus is divine.
In the previous and the Jewish scriptures. But when I look at the Quran as a whole, I don't see it as being a continuation of the same scriptures being given by the same God.
Surah An-Nisa 4:46. Among the Jews are those who distort words from their proper places and say, we hear and disobey. Who were the recipients of Jesus' revelation? Jews? Wait a second. What about the majority of the authors of Bible? They were Jewish?
And not just because I'm reading from corrupted scriptures, as Muslims will often run to. I'm talking about the parts of the Torah that can't be attributed to corruption.
The books you have regarding Torah are written by Jews. So, any book that you have on Torah and Gospel, all of them are susceptible to corruption. Not a single one of them are a source that are reliable enough to be considered the revelation of God completely.
The stories that they tell are different from the Quran, and so the Quran presents a discontinuity with God's message. But I've still got the rest of the book to read, so stick with me, and I'll see you tomorrow.
I don't know why you're even trying to read the Quran, because I know you're not trying to read it to understand it, and you're not trying to see guidance. You're just trying to see content. That is the thing. Because so far, you're not even deep into learning the Quran, and I can see you're not reading it to learn. You're just reading it for content, right? And it is pretty embarrassing so far how little you know about your own religion and how twisted your perception of God actually is. And you're trying to see if your perception of God matches with what God actually is. And if what God actually is different from what you think, that means God is not God. What you think God is, that is what God is.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.